In 1842, England, a woman without family protection was a woman without defense. The law offered her nothing. Society offered her less. Under the doctrine of coverture, which had governed English law for centuries, a married woman's legal identity was entirely absorbed into her husband's. She could not own property, could not sign contracts, could not sue or be sued, could not even keep the wages she earned without permission from whatever man controlled her affairs. An unmarried woman fared little better. If her father died and left her in the care of a stepmother who despised her, she had no recourse, no appeal, no escape. She was, in the eyes of the law, barely a person at all. The courts would not help her. The church would counsel patience and submission. Society would whisper that she must have done something to deserve her fate. Welcome back to The Duke's Revenge. Before we begin tonight's story, tell me where you're joining me from. Whether it's morning coffee in Melbourne, a late night in London, or a quiet moment stolen between obligations somewhere in between, drop your location and your local time in the comments. This community stretches around the globe, and every comment reminds me that stories connect us across every boundary. Tonight's tale is about a woman who spent 4 years sleeping in an attic while her stepsisters wore silk. A woman who kept her father's books, who knew exactly how much money her stepmother was stealing, who documented every lie and every theft in a ledger hidden beneath a loose floorboard. A woman who had stopped hoping for rescue because she had learned, in the cruelest possible way, that hope was a luxury she could not afford. But what she didn't know, what she could not have imagined, was that someone had been watching. Someone with resources that stretched across England and beyond. Someone who had spent 18 months gathering evidence, positioning pieces, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, when the most feared duke in England finally made his move, he did not simply save her. He made every person who had ever hurt her kneel at her feet and beg for mercy they would not receive. Let me take you to a ballroom in London, to a night in October 1842, where everything changed forever. The stepmother knelt on the cold marble floor of her own drawing room, her emerald silk gown pooling around her like spilled wine, her carefully arranged hair coming loose from its pins as she prostrated herself before the stepdaughter she had tormented for 4 years. "Please," Lady Minerva Harcourt whispered, and her voice cracked on the word, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "Please, I beg you, have mercy." Gemma Harcourt stood above her, wearing a duchess's diamonds around her throat and a duchess's ice in her veins, and felt nothing at all. No, that was not quite true. She felt something, a cold, crystalline satisfaction that spread through her chest like frost across a window pane. She felt the weight of 4 years of suffering finally being acknowledged. She felt the man standing behind her, his presence solid and warm and impossibly real. The man who had made all of this possible. "Mercy," Gemma repeated, and her voice did not waver. "You speak to me of mercy, Lady Minerva? Did you show mercy when you moved me from my mother's bedroom to the attic? Did you show mercy when you sold my mother's jewelry and let your daughters wear it in front of me? Did you show mercy when Sophronia broke my wrist and you told the physician I had fallen down the stairs?" Lady Minerva flinched, as though struck. "I didn't. I never meant. You meant every moment of it." Gemma's voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room like a blade. "You planned it before you even married my father. You saw a dying man with a young daughter and a fortune, and you calculated exactly how to steal everything from both of us." She looked down at the woman who had made her life a living hell, at the gray face and trembling hands and eyes wild with terror, and she smiled. "No," she said simply. "No mercy." but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to the ballroom where everything changed, and the impossible moment when a duke asked a servant to dance. 3 hours earlier, the champagne glass slipped from Gemma's fingers and shattered against the marble floor. She did not hear it break. She did not hear the gasps from nearby guests or the sharp intake of breath from her stepmother standing 3 feet away. She heard nothing at all except the rush of blood in her ears and the impossible words still echoing through the glittering ballroom of Hartington House. Miss Gemma Harcourt, the major domo had announced, his voice carrying across 500 guests with the practiced projection of a man who had spent 30 years calling out names at society events. The Duke of Ironmere requests the honor of your hand for the next waltz. The Duke of Ironmere, Phineas Blackwell, the man they called the Shadow Duke because he moved through society like smoke, appearing without warning, disappearing without explanation, leaving ruined men and collapsed fortunes in his wake. The man who had not danced at a public ball in 7 years. The man who had served as one of Britain's most effective intelligence officers during the Napoleonic Wars, running networks of spies across Europe, and who now used those same skills to gather secrets that made him both invaluable and terrifying to the aristocracy. That man was standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching her with eyes the color of a winter storm, and he had just requested her hand. Her, Gemma Harcourt, the stepdaughter who slept in the attic, the girl in the twice-mended gown that had once belonged to her dead mother, the woman her stepmother introduced, on the rare occasions she was introduced at all, as my late husband's daughter, from his first marriage, the words dripping with implications about madness or scandal, or both. You must be mistaken, she heard herself say, though her lips felt numb and her voice seemed to come from very far away. You must mean my stepsister, Sophronia. She's the one in the blue silk, just there. She's been hoping for an introduction, and I'm sure she would be honored to. I'm not mistaken. He was closer now. She had not seen him move, but suddenly he was standing before her, tall and broad-shouldered, in impeccable black evening clothes. His dark hair swept back from a face that might have been carved from granite. A scar ran along his jaw, thin and white, the remnant of some violence she could not imagine. His eyes, that impossible gray, held hers with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place, a butterfly beneath glass. I requested you, Miss Harcourt, he said, and his voice was low enough that only she could hear it beneath the swelling orchestra. I have been waiting quite some time for the opportunity. I don't understand. No? Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Something that might have been satisfaction, or anticipation, or hunger. You don't. But you will. He extended his hand, and Gemma stared at it as though it might transform into a serpent. White gloves, immaculate. Long fingers. The kind of hand that signed documents that destroyed men's lives, that moved pieces across a chessboard she could not see, that had once, if the rumors were true, put a bullet through a French spy's skull at 30 paces. Behind her, she could feel her stepmother's gaze boring into her spine like a blade. Lady Minerva Harcourt had brought Gemma to this ball as a servant, not a guest. She was here to fetch refreshments for her stepsisters, to hold their wraps, to fade into the wallpaper, and cause no trouble. She was most certainly not here to dance with dukes, but a duke had asked her, in front of 500 witnesses, and refusing would cause exactly the kind of scene Lady Minerva had threatened to punish her for if she ever embarrassed the family in public. Gemma placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, warm even through 2 layers of gloves, and she felt something spark along her nerve endings, something electric and alarming and entirely inappropriate for a woman in her circumstances. Come, he said, and led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra began the waltz. Now, It's important to understand what a waltz meant in 1842 England. This was not a country dance where partners might be separated by the figures, where conversation was impossible over the movement and the music. The waltz had been considered scandalous when it first arrived from the continent, so shocking that it was banned from certain assemblies well into the 1820s. The reason was simple: intimacy. In the waltz, a man held a woman close. His hand rested on her waist. Their bodies moved together in three-quarter time, faces mere inches apart, and for the duration of the music, they existed in a world that contained only each other. By 1842, the waltz had become acceptable in polite society, but it still carried an undercurrent of danger. A waltz was a statement. A waltz with a stranger was practically a declaration. The Duke of Ironmere held Gemma as though she were made of porcelain and steel simultaneously, gently enough that she could have broken away if she tried, firmly enough that she understood she was not meant to try. "You're frightened," he observed, guiding her through the first turn with an ease that suggested he had been dancing waltzes since before she was born. "Your pulse is racing. I can feel it through your glove." "I am not frightened." The lie tasted sharp on her tongue. "I am confused." "Your Grace, I have never been introduced to you. We have never spoken. I cannot imagine what possible interest you could have in dancing with me of all the women in this room. Can you not?" Another turn. The candles in the chandeliers above them blurred into streaks of gold. The faces of the watching crowd became a smear of color and judgment, and Gemma focused on the Duke's cravat pin, a small silver falcon, because looking at his face felt too dangerous. "I know who you are, Miss Harcourt," he said, and his voice had dropped even lower, pitched for her ears alone. "I know what has been done to you. I know about the attic room with the broken window that lets in the rain. I know about the meals you are not given, the wages you are not paid, the inheritance your stepmother has stolen piece by piece over 4 years. I know about the bruises your stepsisters leave when no one is watching, and I know about the ledger you keep, hidden beneath the loose floorboard by your bed." Gemma stumbled. He caught her effortlessly, his arm tightening around her waist, keeping her upright when her knees threatened to give way. To the watching crowd, it would have looked like nothing more than a graceful recovery from a slightly uneven turn. To Gemma, it felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. "How?" she whispered, and her voice cracked on the word. "How could you possibly?" "I have been watching you for 18 months, the Duke said, and there was no apology in his tone, no shame. Only that terrifying intensity, burning cold as winter fire. "I have been waiting for this moment since March of last year, when one of my agents first brought your situation to my attention. I have paid your stepmother's creditors to keep the estate solvent, because if she lost the house, you would have been thrown into the street. I have bribed the coal merchant to deliver extra fuel to the attic stairwell, because the servant who brings it up believes she is stealing it for herself and does not ask questions. I have ensured that the cook, who was once kind to you, has not been dismissed despite your stepmother's repeated attempts to replace her with someone more loyal to the family's secrets." The waltz continued. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Gemma's feet moved automatically, muscle memory carrying her through the steps, while her mind reeled. "Why?" The word emerged as barely more than breath. "Why would you do any of that? I am no one. I have nothing. I am nothing to you." The Duke's hand shifted on her waist, drawing her imperceptibly closer. When he spoke again, his lips were near her ear, and his breath was warm against her skin. "You are not nothing, Miss Harcourt. You are the woman I am going to marry. And before this night is over, every person who has made you sleep in that attic, who has struck you, who has stolen from you, who has treated you as less than human, will understand exactly what that means." The waltz ended. The music faded into silence, and then into the polite applause that followed every dance. Gemma stood frozen in the Duke's arms, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind unable to process the words he had just spoken. Mary. He had said, Mary. Smile, he murmured, releasing her from the dance hold, but keeping her hand firmly in his. Your stepmother is approaching, and I want her to see exactly how happy you are to have made my acquaintance. Gemma smiled. She did not know how. She did not know where she found the muscle control to curve her lips upward, when everything inside her was screaming in confusion and fear, and something else, something she refused to name, because naming it would make it real. Lady Minerva Harcourt descended upon them like a ship of the line entering battle, her daughters Sophronia and Eugenia trailing in her wake like smaller vessels. Lady Minerva was a handsome woman still, at 43, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive face creams and strategic corsetry. Her gown was emerald silk, chosen to complement the Harcourt emeralds that hung around her throat, emeralds that had belonged to Gemma's mother, and should, by rights, have passed to Gemma on her 20th birthday. Gemma had turned 22 in August. She had spent the day scrubbing the front steps, while her stepsisters ate cake in the parlor. Your Grace, Lady Minerva gushed, her smile so wide it must have ached. What an unexpected honor. I had no idea you were acquainted with my dear stepdaughter. Gemma, darling, you should have mentioned that you knew the Duke. The word darling dripped with poison. Gemma had not been called darling by Lady Minerva in 4 years, except in public, where appearances must be maintained. Miss Harcourt and I are newly acquainted, the Duke said, and his tone had shifted, becoming the cool, aristocratic drawl that men of his station used when addressing social inferiors, which, Gemma realized with a start, Lady Minerva was. A baronet's widow was nothing compared to a duke. Though I hope to remedy that deficiency, I find her quite fascinating. Lady Minerva's smile flickered. Just for an instant, something ugly flashed behind her eyes before her social mask reasserted itself. How delightful. Though I'm afraid Gemma is not much for society, Your Grace. She prefers quiet evenings at home. Her health, you understand. Delicate constitution. Indeed. The Duke's gaze swept over Gemma with deliberate slowness, taking in the shadows beneath her eyes, the sharpness of her collarbones above her modest neckline, the way her gloves were slightly too large because she had lost weight in the past year and could not afford new ones. She does appear somewhat diminished. I wonder what could account for that. The implication hung in the air between them, blade sharp and unmistakable. Lady Minerva's face went white, then red, then white again. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Your Grace. I'm sure you don't. He turned to Gemma, and his expression shifted into something that might, if she squinted, have passed for warmth. Miss Harcourt, I would be honored if you would join me for supper. I find I have a great many things I wish to discuss with you. Gemma's voice caught. She looked at her stepmother, saw the fury barely contained behind Lady Minerva's social smile, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever happened next, she would pay for this dance. She would pay for every moment of attention the Duke had shown her. The attic room would seem like luxury compared to whatever punishment Lady Minerva devised. Unless the Duke meant what he said. Unless this was real. Unless, after 4 years of suffering, someone had finally come to drag her out of the darkness. Hope was a dangerous thing. Gemma had learned that lesson the hard way, watching her father sicken and die, watching her stepmother transform from a simpering bride into a cold-eyed tyrant the moment the will was read, watching every appeal for help go unanswered because no one believed that a baronet's widow would treat her stepdaughter like a servant. What could destroy you, faster than despair ever could. But the Duke's hand was still holding hers, warm and solid and impossibly real. And his eyes, when she met them, held a promise that terrified her far more than her stepmother's rage. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I would be honored, Your Grace." I have to pause here and tell you something. When I first discovered this story, when I first began piecing together what happened to Gemma Harcourt and the extraordinary man who saved her, I found myself moved in ways I didn't expect. Because this isn't just a story about rescue. It's a story about being seen. About what it means when someone looks at you, really looks, and decides that you matter, that your suffering matters, that justice for what you've endured matters. So many of us know what it feels like to be invisible, to be overlooked, dismissed, treated as less than we are. And there's something powerful about a story where that invisibility ends, where someone with the power to change things actually uses that power. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me take you back now, back before the ballroom and the waltz and the impossible words. Back to the beginning of Gemma Harcourt's nightmare and the beginning of the Duke of Ironmere's obsession. The year was 1838. Sir Edmund Harcourt, Baronet, was dying. He knew it. His physician knew it. The servants knew it, creeping about the house with the hushed solemnity of professional mourners, speaking in whispers that stopped whenever Gemma entered a room. Only his wife, the former Minerva Kendrick, whom he had married 3 years prior, seemed unaware of his impending demise. Or perhaps, Gemma thought with the cynicism of an 18-year-old who had watched her father's second marriage with growing alarm, Lady Minerva simply didn't care enough to notice. "Promise me," Sir Edmund rasped, his hand cold and dry in Gemma's grasp, as she sat beside his bed in the gray light of a November afternoon. Rain streaked the windows, and the fire in the grate had burned low, filling the sick room with shadows. "Promise me you will be kind to your stepmother and stepsisters, Gemma. They will need you when I am gone." Gemma swallowed the bitter laugh that rose in her throat. Kind. Her father wanted her to be kind to the woman who had moved her mother's portrait to the attic within a month of the wedding, claiming it upset the servants. Kind to the stepsisters, who called her the little clerk behind her back because she preferred books and ledgers to needlework and gossip. Kind to the family that had invaded her home and pushed her to its margins, inch by inch, until she felt like a stranger in the house where she had been born. But her father was dying, and she loved him, despite everything, despite the weakness that had led him to remarry so quickly after her mother's death, despite the blindness that kept him from seeing what his new wife truly was. "I promise, Papa," she said. "I will try." Yacht smiled, or attempted to. The consumption had ravaged him, leaving him skeletal and gray, a shadow of the robust man who had taught her to ride and to calculate compound interest with equal enthusiasm. Her father had believed firmly that a woman should understand money, should be able to manage accounts and evaluate investments, should never be entirely dependent on a man's goodwill for her financial security. He had taught Gemma everything he knew, and she had absorbed it eagerly, finding satisfaction in the neat columns of numbers, the logic of balanced books. "You are so like your mother," he murmured. She had that same look when she thought I was being foolish, that same patience for my failures. "You have not failed, Papa." "I have failed you." His eyes, still sharp despite everything, fixed on hers with sudden intensity. "I know I have. I should have provided better for you. I should have written the will differently. But Minerva assured me she would treat you as her own daughter, and I believed her, because I wanted to believe, because I could not face the alternative." Gemma's heart clenched. "What do you mean, the will?" Sir Edmund coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Gemma flinch. When he spoke again, his voice was weaker. The estate passes to Minerva in trust until your 25th birthday, when you will inherit your mother's portion outright. £20,000 and the London house. But until then, he paused, struggling for breath. Until then, you are in her care, legally, financially, in every way that matters. I have written to my solicitor, Mr. Crawford, and instructed him to ensure you are properly provided for. But the law gave her stepmother control. The law allowed Lady Minerva to determine where Gemma lived, what she ate, whether she had a fire in her room or a new dress for the season. The law assumed that a widow would care for her stepdaughter as promised, and offered no recourse if she did not. Now, it's worth pausing here to understand just how completely the law failed women like Gemma in 1838. The Married Women's Property Acts, which would begin to give women some control over their own assets, were still decades away. The first would not pass until 1870, and even then it was limited in scope. In the meantime, a woman's property belonged to her husband, or to whatever male relative or guardian the law designated. A stepmother acting as trustee had enormous power over a stepdaughter's life, and the courts were reluctant to intervene in family matters unless there was evidence of the most extreme abuse, and sometimes not even then. Gemma's situation, as terrible as it was, would not have been unusual for the era. It was simply the way things were. Sir Edmund died 3 days later, on a cold November morning, with rain still streaking the windows and his daughter holding his hand. The funeral was well attended. Sir Edmund had been popular in his quiet way, respected for his honesty in business and his kindness to tenants. Gemma stood at the graveside in her mother's black dress, hastily altered to fit her slimmer frame, and accepted condolences from dozens of people who would, she was certain, forget her existence within the month. Lady Minerva stood beside her, draped in expensive mourning that must have cost more than the household's quarterly budget, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief edged in Belgian lace. Her daughters, Sophronia and Eugenia, flanked her like matching bookends, their expressions carefully arranged into approximations of grief. None of them wept. Gemma did not weep either, but for different reasons. She had cried herself hollow in the days before the funeral, alone in her room with the door locked, muffling her sobs in her pillow so that no one would hear. She had no tears left for public consumption. The changes began immediately. The day after the funeral, Gemma came down to breakfast to find her place at the table had been removed. "You will take your meals in the morning room from now on," Lady Minerva announced, not looking up from her correspondence. "A young woman in mourning should not be subjected to the chaos of a family breakfast. I am thinking only of your comfort." The morning room was a small, cold chamber at the back of the house that had been used for storing unused furniture. The windows faced north and let in little light. There was no fire laid in the grate. Gemma ate alone, served whatever was left over after the family had finished, and told herself it was temporary. A week later, she was informed that her bedroom, the sunny chamber she had occupied since childhood, with its view of the garden and its wallpaper her mother had chosen, was needed for guests. "We will be entertaining extensively once the mourning period ends," Lady Minerva explained, still not meeting Gemma's eyes. "The green room is far more suitable for visitors. You will be much more comfortable in the attic. The servants have already moved your things." The attic room had a slanted ceiling that made it impossible to stand fully upright, except in the center. The window was cracked, letting in drafts that no amount of rags stuffed into the gap could fully block. The bed was a narrow servant's cot, nothing like the four-poster with its embroidered hangings that Gemma had slept in her entire life. There was no fireplace, only a small iron brazier that was permitted to be lit only on the coldest nights, and even then, only with a meager ration of coal. Gemma told herself it was temporary. Wasn't temporary. Over the following months, Gemma watched her life dismantled piece by piece, like a grand house being stripped by creditors. Her mother's jewelry disappeared into Lady Minerva's jewelry box, or onto the necks and wrists of Sophronia and Eugenia. Her horse, a gentle bay mare named Rosalind, that had been her companion since she was 12, was sold to reduce expenses. Her allowance was eliminated until the estate's finances stabilize. Her invitations to social events dried up because Lady Minerva did not include her name when responding, and eventually people stopped sending invitations at all. She became a ghost in her own home, a shadow, a servant in everything but name, expected to mend her stepsister's clothes and help with household accounts, and make herself useful in 1,000 small ways that no gentleman's daughter should ever have been asked to do. And when she tried to protest, when she gathered her courage and demanded an accounting of the estate finances, demanding to know what had happened to the income from her mother's properties, Lady Minerva laughed in her face. "You have no right to question my management of this household," her stepmother said, and her voice was no longer the sweet, simpering tone she had used when Sir Edmund was alive. It was cold now, hard as flint, sharp as broken glass. "You are an unmarried woman under my legal guardianship. You have no rights at all. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will become." That night, Gemma began keeping a ledger. She had inherited her father's head for numbers, his obsessive attention to financial detail. She had helped him manage the estate accounts since she was 14, had understood balance sheets and profit margins, while her stepsisters were still struggling with basic arithmetic. Now, she turned that skill to a darker purpose. She documented everything, every unexplained expense, every piece of her mother's jewelry that appeared on Lady Minerva's person, every discrepancy between the income the estate should have generated and the income Lady Minerva claimed it produced. She noted the dates when valuable items disappeared from the house, cross-referenced them with her stepmother's shopping trips and her stepsister's new wardrobes. She recorded the food she was given, or not given, the coal she was denied, the wages she was owed for, work she should never have been asked to do. The numbers told a damning story. Lady Minerva was not merely mismanaging the estate, she was systematically looting it. Gemma's £20,000 inheritance, which should have been held safely in trust, was being drained at a rate that would leave nothing but debts by the time she reached her 25th birthday. The London house had already been sold, though Gemma had not been informed. The income from her mother's investments was being diverted into accounts Gemma could not access. She was being robbed in broad daylight, and there was nothing she could do about it. But she documented it anyway, because the truth mattered, even if no one would ever read it. Because some part of her refused to let the lies stand unchallenged, even in secret. The first time Sophronia struck her, Gemma was so shocked she did not even cry out. It was a small thing, the incident that provoked it. Gemma had accidentally spilled tea on one of Sophronia's fashion magazines while reaching for the sugar bowl. The sugar bowl she was technically not permitted to use, since Lady Minerva had decreed that Gemma did not deserve such luxuries. An honest mistake, easily cleaned, insignificant in any normal household. But this was not a normal household. Sophronia's hand connected with Gemma's cheek with a crack that echoed through the drawing room. Gemma's head snapped to the side, pain blooming hot and immediate across her face, her ear ringing from the force of the blow. "You clumsy wretch," Sophronia hissed. Her face, which could be quite pretty when she smiled, was twisted into something ugly with rage. "That magazine came all the way from Paris. Do you have any idea what it cost? More than you're worth, certainly." Gemma pressed her hand to her stinging cheek and looked toward Lady Minerva, waiting for the reprimand that surely must come. No matter how badly her stepmother treated her, surely she would not condone physical violence against a gentleman's daughter. Lady Minerva did not look up from her embroidery. "Do be more careful, Gemma," she said mildly. "Sophronia has every right to be upset. You really are terribly careless. Perhaps some additional duties will help you focus better. You can clean the front steps tomorrow morning. Before dawn, please. We don't want the neighbors to see." After that, the hitting became routine. Sophronia was the worst, quick-tempered and vicious, fond of pinches that left bruises in places that clothing would cover, slaps that made Gemma's ears ring, once a twist of the wrist so violent that something cracked and Gemma had to bite her lip bloody to keep from screaming. The physician who came to set the bone was told she had fallen down the stairs. He looked at Gemma with eyes that might have held suspicion, but he said nothing. Physicians did not question the word of their employers. It was not done. Eugenia preferred subtler cruelties, tripping Gemma on the stairs, accidentally, spilling ink on her few remaining good dresses, whispering, cutting remarks just loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to deny. She had a particular talent for psychological torment, for finding the words that would wound most deeply and delivering them with a sweet smile. Lady Minerva never struck Gemma directly. She did not need to. She had daughters for that. And Gemma endured because there was nothing else she could do. Because the alternative was the street, the workhouse, a slow death of starvation and exposure. Because she was waiting, with the desperate patience of a prisoner counting down to release, for her 25th birthday. 3 more years. Then 2. Then 1. She could survive 1 more year. And then, one cold March morning in 1841, a letter arrived that shattered even that fragile hope. "I have had news from Mr. Crawford," Lady Minerva announced at breakfast, waving a piece of paper with theatrical dismay. Gemma watched from the doorway of the morning room, where she had been waiting to collect the family's empty plates. It seems there was an error in Sir Edmund's will, a terrible clerical error that no one caught until now. Gemma's blood turned to ice. "The trust wasn't properly established," Lady Minerva continued, and she was not even trying to hide her smile. "Which means the £20,000 never existed as a separate fund. It was simply part of the general estate, which of course falls entirely under my control, as your dear father's widow. The London house, I'm afraid, had to be sold 2 years ago to cover debts. There is nothing left for you to inherit, Gemma. Nothing at all." She looked up then, her eyes meeting Gemma's with triumphant malice. "I did try to tell your father that his financial affairs were in disorder. Such a tragedy that he wouldn't listen. It was a lie. Gemma knew it was a lie. The will had been properly drafted. She had seen the documents herself, had helped her father review them before he signed. But Mr. Crawford was old now, and ill, and unlikely to challenge the word of a baronet's widow. The original documents had probably been destroyed or altered, replaced with forgeries that would pass casual inspection. She had no proof, no recourse, no hope. That was the day Gemma stopped fighting. She stopped arguing about her meals, about her room, about the work she was made to do. She stopped protecting herself when Sophronia's temper flared. She stopped eating properly, not a conscious decision, but a gradual surrender. Because what was the point of maintaining her strength when she had nothing to be strong for? She grew thin, then thinner. Her dresses hung on her frame like sacks, and Lady Minerva made cutting remarks about how unattractive she had become, how no man would ever want such a scarecrow, how it was merciful that she would never be subjected to the marriage mart when she would only embarrass the family. Gemma agreed. She agreed with everything. Now, it was easier than fighting. She was 21 years old, and she was already dead inside. And 1,000 miles away, in a study in London, a man with storm-gray eyes opened a letter from one of his agents and began to read. The Duke of Ironmere had made his fortune and his fearsome reputation through information. He had spent 5 years during the Napoleonic Wars as one of Britain's most effective intelligence officers, running networks of spies and informants across Europe, ferreting out secrets that helped win battles and topple governments. He had killed men with his own hands when necessary, had watched friends die in the shadow wars that never made it into history books, had learned that information was the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. When the war ended, he had turned those skills to civilian purposes, building an empire of whispered knowledge that made him both invaluable and terrifying to the aristocracy. He knew which lords kept mistresses and which kept catamites. He knew which merchants were one bad investment away from bankruptcy, and which were hiding fortunes in foreign banks. He knew the secrets that people killed to protect, and he collected them the way other men collected art or horses. But he was not, despite his reputation, a cruel man. He did not use his knowledge to destroy without purpose. He did not blackmail for sport or ruin lives for entertainment. He targeted the corrupt, the predatory, the men who abused their power and the women who enabled them. He had brought down 3 members of Parliament, 2 earls and a bishop in the past decade, all of them for crimes that would never have seen a courtroom. Justice, he had learned, was not something the law could be trusted to provide. Justice had to be arranged. His agents were everywhere, in great houses and small ones, among the servants and the shopkeepers, and the endless stream of people who passed through London streets without being noticed. They watched, they listened, they reported. And in March of 1841, one of them reported something that made the Duke set down his brandy and read the letter 3 times over. The agent was a woman named Mrs. Blackwood, who had placed herself as a cook in the household of Lady Minerva Harcourt 6 months prior, following a routine inquiry into the family's finances. Her reports had been unremarkable until now, cataloging the usual small corruptions of a widow living beyond her means. Inflated household accounts, servants paid late or not at all, corners cut on everything from candles to coal. But this report was different. "There is a young woman in the house," Mrs. Blackwood had written in her careful, coded hand, "the stepdaughter of Lady Harcourt, who is treated in a manner I can only describe as criminal. She sleeps in the attic, in a room unfit for habitation. The window is broken and has not been repaired despite 3 requests. She is fed scraps, when she is fed at all. I have observed her stealing vegetable peelings from the kitchen waste when she thinks no one is watching. She is struck regularly by her stepsisters, in full view of the household, with Lady Harcourt's apparent approval. She is worked like a servant, but paid nothing, and the few possessions she brought to this house have been systematically stolen. I have made inquiries, and learned that this young woman, Miss Gemma Harcourt, was the only child of Sir Edmund Harcourt's first marriage, and should by rights have inherited a substantial sum upon reaching her majority. The inheritance has disappeared. The young woman has no resources, no allies, and no hope of escape. She is, Your Grace, the most completely destroyed person I have ever encountered, and I do not believe she will survive another winter in her current circumstances." The Duke read the letter a 4th time. Then he began making inquiries of his own. It took him 6 months to assemble the full picture, and what he found made him want to put his fist through a wall. The fraud was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Lady Minerva had been planning to steal Gemma's inheritance since before she married Sir Edmund, had cultivated the dying man with calculated patience, had promised to care for his daughter, while plotting to strip her of everything she possessed. The original will had indeed been replaced with a forgery. The Duke's agents found the forger, a disgraced clerk in Bristol named Thomas Whitley, who confessed everything in exchange for passage to America and enough money to start a new life. The stolen money had been spent on gowns and jewelry and expensive trips to the continent for Lady Minerva and her daughters, on bribes to silence anyone who might have questioned her treatment of her stepdaughter, on maintaining a lifestyle that the estate's legitimate income could never have supported. And Gemma had been systematically brutalized for 4 years, starved and beaten and stripped of every comfort and dignity, reduced from a baronet's daughter to something less than a servant. The Duke obtained a detailed list of her injuries from Mrs. Blackwood, who had carefully observed and documented everything. Bruised ribs that had never been properly treated, a wrist that had healed crookedly after being twisted too hard, scars on her palms from being forced to scrub floors without gloves in the dead of winter, frostbite on her toes from nights in an unheated attic room. He should have moved immediately. He should have stormed into that house and carried her out that very day, legal consequences be damned. But the Duke of Ironmere was not a man who acted on impulse. He had learned, in the brutal school of wartime intelligence, that patience was the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. Strike too soon, and your enemy might escape. Strike too soon, and the victory might be incomplete. Strike too soon, and the person you were trying to save might end up worse off than before. He wanted more than rescue. He wanted justice. He wanted Lady Minerva Harcourt and her monstrous daughters to understand exactly what they had done. He wanted them humiliated, impoverished, cast out from the society they had climbed over Gemma's broken body to enter. He wanted them to kneel at Gemma's feet and beg for mercy, knowing they would receive none. And so he waited. He watched. He positioned his pieces with the care of a chess master, preparing an unbeatable endgame, and he ensured that Gemma survived long enough for him to save her. The coal deliveries she did not know about routed through a servant who thought she was cheating her mistress. The food packages that appeared mysteriously in the kitchen, which Mrs. Blackwood attributed to a generous neighbor and shared with the starving girl whenever she could. The debts he paid secretly, keeping the household solvent when it should have collapsed, because if Lady Minerva lost the house, Gemma would have nowhere to go. He read Mrs. Blackwood's reports with obsessive attention, devouring every detail about Gemma's daily existence. He learned that she still kept her ledger, still documented every theft and fraud, despite having no hope of using the information. He learned that she read books from the library in secret, in the small hours of the night when everyone else was sleeping, because literature was the only escape she had left. He learned that she spoke to the kitchen cat, a scruffy marmalade Tom named Nelson, as though he were her only friend in the world, and perhaps he was. He learned that she hummed while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her, though she stopped the moment anyone else entered the room. He learned that she was kind to the servants, despite having no obligation to be, that she shared her meager food with the scullery maid, who was even worse off, that she had once given her only warm shawl to an elderly housemaid who was shivering in the cold. He learned that she was beautiful, though she did not know it, that she had her father's sharp mind and her mother's stubborn courage, though both had been beaten down until they were barely visible, that somewhere beneath the shell of survival she had built around herself, there was still a woman worth saving, a woman of intelligence and grace and quiet, indomitable strength. He learned that he was falling in love with her, though they had never met, though she did not know he existed, though the very idea was absurd, and he should have his head examined for entertaining it. He did not care. By October of 1842, everything was in place. Now, it's important to understand what the Duke was about to do, and why it mattered so profoundly in the context of 1842 England. When a man of his stature, his wealth, his social position, his fearsome reputation, publicly showed interest in a woman, He was making a statement that could not be retracted. Society would watch. Society would remember. And if that woman was the abused stepdaughter of a social climber, if the Duke's attention exposed the truth of what had been done to her, the consequences for her abusers would be swift and merciless. The Ton did not forgive hypocrisy. They might turn a blind eye to cruelty practiced in private. Indeed, they often did. But the moment that cruelty became public knowledge, the perpetrators became pariahs. It was not about morality, it was about appearances. Lady Minerva had presented herself as a respectable widow, raising her stepdaughter with loving care. If the Duke revealed her as a thief, an abuser, a monster who had starved and beaten a gentleman's daughter while wearing that daughter's mother's jewels, she would be finished. Not because society was outraged by the cruelty, but because she had made them look like fools for believing her performance. Lady Minerva had spent 4 years building a social position based on lies. The Duke was about to topple that position in a single evening. But that was only the beginning. He had solicitors standing by with copies of the forged will and the forger's sworn confession. He had creditors prepared to call in every debt Lady Minerva owed, debts that totaled 3 times what she could possibly pay. He had witnesses who would testify to Gemma's abuse, servants who had been waiting years for someone to ask them the right questions, who had observed the bruises and the starvation and the cruelty and had been powerless to intervene. And he had, in his breast pocket, a special license that would allow him to marry Gemma Harcourt the moment she agreed. No bans, no waiting period, no opportunity for Lady Minerva to interfere. Special licenses were expensive. Only the wealthy could afford them, and they required approval from the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. The Duke had obtained his 3 months ago, and had been carrying it with him ever since, waiting for the right moment. Tonight was that moment. He would take Gemma out of that house tonight, and he would never allow anyone to hurt her again. The supper at the Hartington ball was an intimate affair, intimate, at least, by the standards of the Haute Ton. Only 200 guests were seated in the grand dining room, arranged according to elaborate rules of precedence that had governed English society for centuries. The Duke had arranged, through careful manipulation of the seating charts, for himself and Gemma to be placed at a small table in an alcove that afforded them something approaching privacy. Lady Minerva had tried to intervene, had insisted that Gemma was needed elsewhere, that she was feeling unwell, that she simply could not impose upon the Duke's generosity. The Duke had smiled, the kind of smile that showed too many teeth, the kind of smile that made men who owed him money break out in cold sweats, and said that he would not dream of allowing Miss Harcourt to miss supper when she was clearly in need of nourishment. The implication had silenced Lady Minerva more effectively than any threat. Now Gemma sat beside the most powerful man she had ever met, a bowl of soup cooling in front of her because her hands were shaking too badly to lift the spoon, and tried to understand how her life had transformed so completely in the space of an hour. "Eat," the Duke said quietly. "You need strength for what comes next." What comes next? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Your Grace, I still don't understand any of this. You say you've been watching me, helping me, but why? I am no one. I have nothing to offer you. I am not beautiful. I have no fortune. I have no connections. I have nothing that could possibly interest a man like you. You have yourself." His gray eyes met hers with that terrifying intensity. "That is more than enough. But I'm—" She stopped, struggling to find words for what she was. Broken, ruined, worthless. All the things her stepmother had told her, repeated so often that she had begun to believe them. "You are Gemma Harcourt," the Duke said, as though that explained everything. "You are the woman who kept a secret ledger for 4 years, documenting every crime committed against you because you refused to let the truth be erased, even when no one would listen. You are the woman who showed kindness to servants when your step-family showed them nothing but contempt, who shared your meager meals with a kitchen cat and a scullery maid, who read poetry in the dead of night, because you refused to let them crush your spirit entirely. Gemma's throat tightened. How do you know about the poetry? I know everything, Miss Harcourt. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table toward her, including this. She unfolded it with trembling fingers, and her breath caught. It was a poem, one she had written herself years ago in the early days of her captivity, when she still had enough hope to put words to paper. She had thought it lost, probably thrown out with the other papers Lady Minerva had cleared from her room when banishing her to the attic. Where did you get this? Mrs. Blackwood, the cook, found it in the ash bin behind the kitchen. She recognized good poetry when she saw it, and she knew I would want to see it. A hint of warmth crept into his voice. You have talent, Miss Harcourt. Considerable talent. That poem has been on my desk for 18 months now. I have read it more times than I can count. Gemma stared at him, at this impossible man who had somehow seen her, truly seen her, when everyone else had looked right through her. I don't understand, she said again, because she had no other words. Then let me be plain. The Duke leaned forward, his voice dropping until it was meant for her ears alone. I am asking you to marry me, Gemma. Tonight. I have a special license in my pocket, and a clergyman waiting at my townhouse. Say yes, and within the hour, you will be the Duchess of Ironmere, beyond your stepmother's reach forever. That's insane. Perhaps. He did not look away. But I have spent 18 months falling in love with you through letters and reports and stolen poems. I have spent 18 months planning how to save you, how to give you the life you deserve, how to make every person who hurt you pay for what they have done. I am not a patient man by nature, Miss Harcourt, but I have been patient for you. I have waited until I could offer you not just rescue, but justice. And now that the moment has come, I find I am unwilling to wait a single day longer. You don't love me. The words came out harsh, defensive. You can't. You don't even know me. You know reports and observations, and a poem I wrote when I was 19. That's not the same as knowing a person. I know you better than anyone alive. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I know you prefer tea to coffee, and that you take it without sugar, because your stepmother stopped providing sugar for your meals 3 years ago. I know you hum when you work, old folk songs your mother taught you, though you stop the moment anyone else enters the room. I know you cry at night, quietly, into your pillow, and that you have not slept through the night without nightmares in over 2 years. Gemma's eyes were burning. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here, not in public, not when 500 people were watching and waiting to see what the Duke of Ironmere wanted with the sad little stepdaughter in the mended dress. I know you are brave, the Duke continued, his voice gentling. Braver than you understand. I know you have survived things that would have destroyed a lesser person, and I know that somewhere beneath the shell you have built to protect yourself, there is still a woman capable of joy, of hope, of love. I want to give you the space to find that woman again. I want to spend the rest of my life helping you heal. And if I say no? The question hung between them. The Duke's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability quickly suppressed. Then I will still destroy your stepmother, he said quietly. I will still ensure that justice is done. I will still offer you protection, resources, a home where you can recover in safety. You will owe me nothing, and I will ask nothing of you that you do not wish to give. He paused. "But I will not pretend that your refusal would not break my heart." Gemma looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he had asked her to dance. She saw the scar along his jaw, evidence of violence survived. She saw the lines around his eyes, the kind that came from years of carrying heavy burdens. She saw the carefully controlled hunger in his expression, the desperate hope he was trying so hard to hide. This man had spent 18 months saving her life in secret. He had paid her debts, warmed her room, ensured she had food when her stepmother would have let her starve. He had done all of this without expecting anything in return, without even revealing himself, because he wanted her to have a choice. He was giving her a choice now, a real choice, not the illusion of one. She could say no. She could walk away, let him destroy Lady Minerva, take whatever resources he offered, and build a new life on her own terms. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. She barely knew this man. Marriage was forever. She had seen what happened to women who married badly. She was living proof of what could happen when a woman's fate was placed in the wrong hands. But she had spent 4 years in hell, dreaming of rescue that never came. And here was rescue, finally, impossibly, sitting across from her and offering her not just safety, but love. Here was a man who had seen her at her most, broken, and found her worth saving anyway. Was that not worth a leap of faith? "If I marry you," she said slowly, "will you let me be part of it? The justice, I mean. I want to see her face when she realizes what's happening. I want her to know that I survived, despite everything she did to me." The Duke's smile was sudden and fierce and utterly beautiful. "My darling Miss Harcourt," he said, "I would not dream of denying you that satisfaction." But first, there was the matter of Lord Ashton. Gemma did not notice him approaching until he was standing at their table, blocking the candlelight with his broad shoulders and his broader smile. Lord Ashton was handsome in the way that wealthy men who had never been denied anything tended to be handsome, sleek and satisfied, and vaguely predatory. "Ironmere," he said, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of the extremely privileged. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your charming companion. Won't you introduce us?" "Daman." Duke's expression went flat as stone. "Miss Harcourt is not receiving introductions this evening, Ashton. We are engaged in private conversation." "Come now. Don't be selfish." Lord Ashton's eyes traveled over Gemma in a way that made her skin crawl, lingering on her décolletage, assessing her like a horse at market. "I've heard the most fascinating rumors about this young lady. Daughter of Sir Edmund Harcourt, isn't she? Tragic story. What happened to that family? But she seems to have landed on her feet," his smile sharpened. "Or perhaps on her back." The Duke moved so fast that Gemma didn't see him rise. One moment he was seated across from her. The next, he had Lord Ashton by the throat, slamming him against the wall of the alcove with enough force to rattle the china on nearby tables. "You will apologize," the Duke said, and his voice was calm, almost pleasant, completely at odds with the violence of his grip. "You will apologize to Miss Harcourt for your crude implication, and then you will leave this room, and you will never speak to her or about her again. Is that understood?" Lord Ashton's face was going purple. He clawed at the Duke's hand, but Phineas might as well have been carved from marble. "Ironmere, can't breathe. I asked if you understood." Yes." The Duke released him. Lord Ashton collapsed against the wall, gasping, his cravat ruined, his dignity in shreds. "Now apologize." Lord Ashton's eyes darted around the room, taking in the dozens of witnesses who had watched him be manhandled like a disobedient puppy. His face flushed with humiliation. "I apologize, Miss Harcourt. I spoke out of turn. Yes, Gemma said quietly, her heart pounding. You did. Lord Ashton fled. The Duke returned to his seat as though nothing had happened, straightening his cuffs with precise movements. Forgive me, he said. I do not tolerate insults to those under my protection. Gemma stared at him. You nearly killed him. I was nowhere close to killing him. I know exactly how long a man can survive without oxygen. Lord Ashton had at least another 30 seconds before any permanent damage occurred. He picked up his wineglass and took a calm sip, though I admit I was tempted to test that threshold. Something warm unfurled in Gemma's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. No one has ever defended me before, she said. Then everyone you have ever known has been a fool. He set down his glass and met her eyes. You deserve to be defended, Gemma. You deserve to be protected and cherished and fought for. I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring that you never doubt that again. The wedding took place at 11 o'clock that night in the private chapel of the Duke of Ironmere's London townhouse. Gemma wore the same twice-amended dress she had arrived at the ball in. There had been no time to change, and the Duke had insisted that it did not matter, that she could be wearing rags and he would still think her the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was not sure she believed him, but the look in his eyes when she walked down the aisle made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with her stays. The clergyman was elderly and kind, his voice steady as he led them through the ancient words of the marriage service. The witnesses were the Duke's most trusted servants, men and women who had been with him for years and would never breathe a word of what they had seen. When the Duke slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that felt heavier than its weight, Gemma realized she was crying. I, Phineas, take thee, Gemma, to be my wedded wife, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. I, Gemma, take thee, Phineas, she repeated, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar name, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and obey, till death us do part. The word obey stuck in her throat, but she said it anyway, because it was part of the ceremony, because it was expected, because she was too overwhelmed to argue about the fine print of marriage vows. I now pronounce you man and wife, the clergyman said. You may kiss the bride. The Duke turned to her, and Gemma saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time, a question that asked permission rather than assumed it. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief and chaste, and somehow world-altering anyway. When she pulled back, she was flushed and breathless, and the Duke was looking at her like she had hung the moon. Your Grace, she said, testing the words. I believe I am your wife. You are, he agreed, and I am the luckiest man in England. They did not have a wedding night, not in the traditional sense. The Duke had prepared a suite of rooms for her, separate from his own, with a fire already burning in the grate, and a meal waiting on a small table by the window. He led her there himself, his hand warm and steady on the small of her back, and stood in the doorway while she took in the luxury surrounding her. The room was beautiful, all soft blues and creams, with thick carpets underfoot and heavy curtains that would keep out any draft. The bed was enormous, piled with pillows and covered in silk, nothing like the narrow cot she had slept on for 4 years. There were flowers on the dresser, fresh hothouse roses in October, and a wardrobe that she suspected was already filled with clothes in her size. These rooms are yours, the Duke said, for as long as you want them. I will not come to you unless you invite me, and you need never invite me if you do not wish to. Our marriage is legal and binding regardless of whether we ever share a bed." Gemma turned to face him. "You would agree to a marriage in name only." "I would agree to anything that makes you feel safe." His jaw tightened. "You have spent 4 years having choices taken from you. I will not add to that number. When and if you come to my bed, it will be because you want to be there, not because you feel obligated or afraid or trapped." Something loosened in Gemma's chest, a knot of fear she had not even realized she was carrying. She had heard stories about wedding nights, about husbands who demanded their rights regardless of their wives' feelings, about women who were treated as property to be used rather than people to be cherished. She had been bracing herself for that, steeling herself to endure yet another form of violation. But this man was offering her privacy, respect, time. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing." He stepped forward, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face with infinite gentleness. "Eat the meal that's been prepared for you. Sleep in a real bed for the first time in 4 years. Tomorrow, we begin the work of destroying your stepmother. But tonight, you rest." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft as a blessing, and withdrew. Gemma stood alone in her beautiful new rooms, wearing a wedding ring that still felt foreign on her finger, and tried to process the fact that her life had changed forever. Then she walked to the table, sat down, and ate every bite of the meal that had been prepared for her. It was the first time in 4 years that she had finished a plate. The confrontation with Lady Minerva was scheduled for 10 o'clock the following morning. It never happened. At 7:30, while Gemma was still asleep in her new rooms, dreaming for the first time in years without nightmares, an urgent message arrived at Ironmere House. The Duke read it, and his face went white with rage. Lady Minerva had fled. Someone had warned her. Someone had told her what was coming, and she had gathered what valuables she could carry, roused her daughters from their beds, and disappeared into the night. The Harcourt townhouse stood empty. Servants dismissed without pay, creditors already circling like vultures. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was the second message, which arrived moments after the first. Lady Minerva had not fled alone. She had taken something with her. She had taken Gemma's ledger. The Duke found Gemma in the breakfast room an hour later, staring at a plate of eggs she could not bring herself to eat. She had been told about Lady Minerva's escape, and she had taken the news with the strange, numb calm of someone who had spent years expecting disappointment. "She knew," Gemma said quietly. "She knew what I was doing. She must have found the ledger months ago, maybe years, and she was waiting for me to become a threat. The ledger does not matter." The Duke sat across from her, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. "I have copies of every document, testimony from every witness. Your stepmother's escape changes nothing about the evidence against her. It changes everything about how I feel." Gemma looked up at him, and her eyes were dry, but something in her expression made his chest ache. "That ledger was the only thing I had, the only proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that I wasn't going mad. She took it, and now she's out there somewhere, reading every word I wrote, laughing at how naive I was to think it would ever matter. Gemma, I need to find it." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to get it back. You need to stay here." His voice was gentle but firm. "Lady Minerva is dangerous, and she knows she's cornered. A cornered animal will do anything to survive. I'm not afraid of her. I know you're not. That's what worries me." He rose and crossed to her, taking her, hands in his. "Let me handle this. My agents are already tracking her movements. We will find her, and we will recover your ledger, and we will make her pay for everything she has done. But I need you to be safe while I do it." Gemma wanted to argue. She wanted to demand to be part of the hunt, to be there when Lady Minerva was finally brought to justice. But she looked at Phineas's face, at the worry etched in every line, and she understood that this wasn't about control. This was about love. This was about a man who had spent 18 months protecting her from afar, who could not bear the thought of her in danger now that she was finally within his reach. "How long?" she asked. "A few days, perhaps a week. She cannot have gone far with 2 daughters, and whatever she could carry. And if she has? Then I will follow her to the ends of the earth if necessary." His grip on her hands tightened. "I will find her, Gemma. I swear it on my life." He left that afternoon. Gemma stood at the window of her beautiful new rooms and watched his carriage disappear down the street, and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had been alone for so long. She had thought she was used to it. But this was different. This was worse. Because now she knew what it felt like not to be alone. And the absence of him was a wound she hadn't known she could feel. The first day without Phineas was manageable. Gemma explored Ironmere House with the cautious wonder of someone who had spent years confined to a single cramped room. The house was enormous, 4 stories of marble and mahogany, with more rooms than she could count and more servants than she could name. They all treated her with the utmost respect, bowing and curtsying and calling her "Your Grace" in tones that suggested they actually meant it. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like a gilded cage. She found the library on the 2nd floor, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. There were more books here than she had seen in her entire life, leather-bound volumes in English and French and Latin, histories and philosophies and novels and poetry. She could spend years in this room and never read them all. She pulled a book from the shelf at random, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, and curled up in a chair by the fire. The words blurred before her eyes. She was not really reading. She was waiting. The second day was harder. Gemma woke from nightmares 3 times in the night, reaching for a comfort that was not there. The bed was too soft after years on a thin mattress. The room was too quiet without the sounds of the household stirring around her. She was not hungry, but she forced herself to eat anyway, because Phineas had asked her to take care of herself, and she did not want to disappoint him. She wrote him a letter. Then she tore it up, because she did not know what to say. What did you say to a man who had saved your life and then disappeared into the night to hunt down your tormentors? "Thank you" seemed inadequate. "I miss you" seemed presumptuous. They had known each other for less than 2 days. They had been married for less than 24 hours. And yet she did miss him. She missed the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and rare. She missed the warmth of his hand on hers, the only touch in 4 years that had not hurt. She missed the sound of his voice, low and certain, promising her that everything would be all right. She had not believed in safety for a very long time. She was not sure she believed in it now, but she wanted to, and wanting something, after years of wanting nothing at all, was its own kind of torture. The 3rd day, a letter arrived. Gemma's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The handwriting was unfamiliar, not Phineas's bold, slashing script, but the message was brief and to the point. "Your Grace, Lady Minerva has been located in Dover, attempting to book passage to France. She has been taken into custody and is being held at a local inn, pending your husband's arrival. His Grace expects to conclude this matter within 2 days and return to London shortly thereafter. He asked me to convey that he thinks of you constantly and that he hopes you are eating properly. Your servant, J. Blackwood. Gemma read the letter 3 times. Then she pressed it to her chest and allowed herself, for the first time since she was 18 years old, to hope. 500 miles away, in a cramped private room at the White Hart Inn in Dover, Phineas Blackwell sat across from the woman who had made Gemma's life a living hell. Lady Minerva looked diminished. The journey had not been kind to her. Her hair was disheveled, her gown wrinkled, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. Sophronia and Eugenia had been confined to a separate room, and from the sounds of sobbing that occasionally filtered through the walls, they were not handling their circumstances well. "You cannot do this," Lady Minerva said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I have rights. I am a lady. You cannot simply kidnap me and hold me prisoner." "I can do whatever I wish," Phineas replied calmly. "I am a duke. The local magistrate is in my pocket. The innkeeper owes me a considerable sum of money. And you, Lady Minerva, are a thief and a fraud and a child abuser who has been evading justice for 4 years. I never touched that girl. Your daughters touched her. At your instruction, with your approval. The law may not see much difference." He leaned forward, his gray eyes cold as winter ice. "Where is the ledger?" Lady Minerva's face went even paler. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Miss Harcourt's ledger. The one she kept hidden beneath the floorboards of her room. The one you took when you fled London. Where is it?" I didn't. "Lady Minerva." His voice dropped to a register that made strong men tremble. "I have spent 18 months investigating your crimes. I have documentation of every piece of jewelry you stole, every pound you embezzled, every debt you incurred in your stepdaughter's name. I have testimony from servants who watched you starve and beat a gentleman's daughter. I have a sworn confession from the clerk who forged Sir Edmund's will at your instruction." He let those words hang in the air for a moment, watching the terror bloom in her eyes. "The ledger is the least of your concerns," he continued, "but it matters to my wife. It matters to her a great deal, and I would move heaven and earth to give her what she needs. So I will ask you one more time. Where is the ledger?" Lady Minerva's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks in her powder, and her hands twisted together in her lap like dying birds. "In my trunk," she whispered. "The large one. With the false bottom." Phineas nodded to the agent standing by the door, who slipped out to retrieve the item in question. Then he turned back to Lady Minerva. "Now," he said, "let us discuss the terms of your surrender." On the 5th day, Phineas came home. Gemma heard the commotion from her rooms, the clatter of carriage wheels on cobblestones, the shouts of servants, the bang of the front door opening, and her heart leaped into her throat. She abandoned the book she had been pretending to read and flew down the stairs, propriety forgotten, dignity be damned. He was standing in the entrance hall, travel-stained and exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked like the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Gemma," he said, and the way he spoke her name made something break open in her chest. She crossed the distance between them without thinking, without hesitation, and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, easily, as though he had been waiting for exactly this, and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. She didn't care. She buried her face in his coat, inhaling the scent of road dust and horses, and underneath it all, the familiar warmth that was simply him, and she cried. "I have something for you," he murmured against her hair. "Something I think you've been missing." He released her just enough to reach into his coat and withdraw a leather-bound book, battered and water-stained, but unmistakably familiar. Her ledger. Gemma took it with trembling hands, running her fingers over the cover she had touched 1,000 times in secret, opening it to see her own handwriting chronicling 4 years of crimes and cruelties. "How did you— Lady Minerva is currently in the custody of the local magistrate in Dover, awaiting transport to London to face charges of fraud, theft, and abuse. Her daughters are being held as accessories." A grim satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "They will not escape justice, Gemma. I promise you that. And this," she held up the ledger. "How did you know? I know everything about you, remember?" His voice was gentle. "I know that ledger was the only thing you had, the only proof that you hadn't imagined it all. I would have torn apart half of England to get it back for you." Something shifted in Gemma's chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time began, slowly, to thaw. "I missed you," she said, and the words came out rough and unpolished, and more honest than anything she had said in years. "I know it's absurd. We barely know each other. We've been married for less than a week. But I missed you so much I couldn't breathe." "It's not absurd." He cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up to meet his eyes. "I have been missing you for 18 months, Gemma. Every report I read about you, every detail I learned, every piece of your life that I collected and hoarded like a miser with gold. I was missing you, missing someone I had never met, aching for someone I had no right to want. So no, it is not absurd to miss someone after 5 days apart." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This kiss was hungry and desperate and full of longing, the kiss of a man who had been starving and was finally allowed to feast. Gemma kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring into it all the loneliness and fear and tentative hope of the past week, all the years of wanting something she hadn't dared to name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. "Come with me to see her brought low. Let her see your face when she realizes she has lost." "Yes," Gemma breathed. "Yes, I want to be there. I want to see." And so she did. The morning they confronted Lady Minerva was cold and gray, the kind of London morning that seemed to seep into your bones, no matter how many layers you wore. Gemma, dressed carefully in one of the new gowns Phineas had provided, a deep burgundy silk that made her look like a duchess instead of a scullery maid. She wore diamonds at her throat and in her ears, diamonds that Phineas had chosen specifically because they were grander than any of the jewels Lady Minerva had stolen from her mother. She wanted her stepmother to see exactly what she had become. They traveled to the magistrate's offices in Phineas's carriage, his hand warm over hers the entire way. He had told her what to expect. Lady Minerva and her daughters had been transferred to London overnight and were being held in a private room pending formal charges. The confrontation would not be public, not yet, but it would be thorough. "Are you ready?" he asked as the carriage rolled to a stop. "No," Gemma admitted, "but I want to do it anyway." The room where Lady Minerva was being held was small and sparse, nothing like the grand drawing rooms she had presided over for 4 years. She sat in a hard wooden chair, her wrists bound in front of her, her face haggard and her eyes wild. Sophronia and Eugenia were seated behind her, similarly restrained, their cheeks blotchy from crying. When Gemma walked through the door, dressed in silk and diamonds with a duke at her side, Lady Minerva made a sound like a wounded animal. "You," she spat. "You did this. You ungrateful, worthless—" "Silence!" Phineas's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. "You will speak to the Duchess with respect, or you will not speak at all." Lady Minerva's mouth snapped shut, but her eyes burned with hatred. Gemma stepped forward until she was standing directly in front of the woman who had made her life a living hell. She looked at the gray face and trembling hands and eyes wild with terror, and felt a cold, crystalline satisfaction spread through her chest. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "what you told me the first night after my father's funeral? You came to my room. My real room, the one you took from me a week later, and you told me that things were going to change. Do you remember what you said?" Lady Minerva said nothing. "You said that I had no rights," Gemma continued, "that I was nothing without your protection, that the sooner I accepted my place, the easier my life would become. You said you would break me if you had to, that no one would ever believe a word I said against you, because I was just a girl with no money and no connections and no value to anyone." She leaned down until her face was level with her stepmother's. "You were wrong." Lady Minerva flinched. "I have rights now," Gemma said. "I have a husband who will defend them with every resource at his disposal. I have money and connections and power that you cannot even imagine. And I have 4 years of documented proof of every crime you committed against me." She straightened, looking down at the woman who had once looked down at her. "You took everything from me, my home, my inheritance, my dignity, my hope. You tried to destroy me, and you nearly succeeded. There were nights when I thought about simply not waking up, because death seemed preferable to another day in your household." Her voice hardened. "But I survived. And now, Lady Minerva, you will experience exactly what it feels like to lose everything." She turned to look at Sophronia and Eugenia, who were cowering behind their mother, their faces streaked with tears. "You too," she said, and her voice was ice. "You who hit me and pinched me and broke my wrist. You who laughed when I cried and smiled when I bled. Did you think there would be no consequences? Did you think no one would ever hold you accountable?" Sophronia let out a sob. Eugenia had gone so pale, she looked like she might faint. "The court will decide your fate," Gemma continued, "but I want you to know, right now, that I will never forgive you. I will never forget what you did to me. And I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." She turned back to Lady Minerva one final time. "And you will kneel before me and beg my forgiveness." Lady Minerva stared at her stepdaughter, the girl she had starved and beaten and robbed, the girl who was now a duchess with the power to destroy her utterly, and for a long moment, pride warred with terror on her face. Terror won. Slowly, painfully, hampered by her bound wrists, Lady Minerva lowered herself from her chair onto her knees. The cold stone floor must have been agony on her aging joints, but she did not complain. She knew better now. "Forgive me," she whispered. "Please, I beg you. Have mercy." Gemma looked at her for a long moment, looked at the woman who had stolen her inheritance, who had banished her to the attic, who had allowed her to be beaten and starved and worked to exhaustion, looked at the woman who had tried to erase her from existence. "No," Gemma said, simply, "no mercy." And she walked away, her husband at her side, leaving Lady Minerva kneeling on the cold floor behind her. The aftermath was everything Phineas had promised. Lady Minerva was tried and convicted of fraud, theft, and accessory to assault. The evidence was overwhelming. The forger's confession, the servant's testimony, the financial records that showed exactly how she had looted Gemma's inheritance. She was sentenced to transportation to Australia, a fate that struck many as worse than death for a woman who had prized her social standing above all else. Sophronia and Eugenia were convicted as accessories and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. The pretty faces that had once sneered at Gemma would age quickly in the workhouses, and their marriage prospects, already destroyed by the scandal, would never recover. Society, predictably, was horrified. Not by the crimes themselves. Such things happened in great houses all the time, and everyone knew it. But by the public exposure of them. Lady Minerva had fooled them all, had presented herself as a respectable widow while torturing her stepdaughter in secret, and they could not forgive the humiliation of having believed her lies. The Harcourt name became synonymous with disgrace. Anyone who had ever associated with Lady Minerva found themselves shunned, and the ripples of the scandal spread outward through society like waves from a stone dropped in still water. And Gemma, the Duchess of Ironmere, became something of a legend. The girl who had been invisible. The girl who had survived. The girl who had kept a secret ledger for 4 years, documenting every crime committed against her, waiting for someone to believe her. The girl who had married a duke and watched her tormentors brought to justice. Women whispered about her at balls and dinners, half admiring and half afraid. Men who had daughters looked at them differently, wondering what might be happening behind closed doors. And a few brave souls, servants and governesses and stepdaughters and wards, began to speak up about their own abusers, emboldened by Gemma's example. Change came slowly, as change always did. But it came. And Gemma, watching from the safety of Ironmere House with her husband at her side, allowed herself to believe that some good had come from her suffering, after all. The first weeks of their marriage were a delicate dance of boundaries and tentative trust. Phineas continued to sleep in his own chambers, as promised. He continued to ask permission before touching her, before even taking her hand. He continued to give her space, to let her set the pace, to prove through 1,000 small actions that she was safe with him. And slowly, gradually, Gemma began to believe it. She began to seek out his company, finding excuses to be where he was. She began to touch him casually, a hand on his arm when she passed, fingers brushing his as she accepted a book from his hands. Small intimacies that felt enormous given everything she had been through. She began to laugh again, quietly at first, startled by the sound of her own voice lifted in amusement. Then more freely, as she rediscovered that joy was not a luxury reserved for other people. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting together in the library. Phineas at his desk, working through correspondence. Gemma curled in a chair by the fire with a novel she was actually reading this time. The room was warm and quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of two people who did not need to fill the air with words. "Phineas," she said suddenly, surprising herself. He looked up, his pen pausing mid-stroke. "Yes?" She hesitated, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I was wondering if you might." He set down his pen and gave her his full attention, his gray eyes patient and kind. "Whatever it is, you can ask me. Would you?" She took a breath. "Would you come sit with me? By the fire?" Something flickered in his expression. Hope, carefully controlled. Of course. He crossed the room and settled into the chair beside hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not quite touching. She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his, and felt something inside her relax at the contact. "I want to try," she said quietly. "Being truly married, I mean, not just on paper." "Gemma." His voice was rough. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's why I want to." She met his eyes, letting him see the truth of it. "You have given me so much, Phineas. Safety, freedom, justice. You have asked for nothing in return. But I find that I want to give you something. I want to be your wife. Not because I owe you, not because I'm obligated, but because I choose it. Because I choose you." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then come to me," he said, "whenever you're ready. My door is always open to you." She went to him that night. It was not a grand seduction, not a passionate tumble born of overwhelming desire. It was quiet and gentle and careful, two people learning each other's bodies with the same attention they had given to learning each other's hearts. Phineas touched her like she was precious, like she was breakable, like she was the most important thing in his world. And when it was over, when she lay curled against his chest in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Gemma felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt whole. "I think I might be falling in love with you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "I have been in love with you for 18 months. I can wait for you to catch up." She laughed, soft and surprised, and tilted her head up to kiss him. "I don't think you'll have to wait very long," she said. She was right. The months that followed were the happiest of Gemma's life. She learned the rhythms of Ironmere House, the names and faces of the servants who ran it, the responsibilities that came with being a duchess. She discovered that she had a talent for household management. All those years of forced labor had given her skills she never expected to use for her own benefit, and she threw herself into making the house a true home. She learned her husband, too. She learned that he was ticklish behind his left ear, that he talked in his sleep, murmuring fragments of French and code names from his days as a spy, that he was secretly afraid of spiders, but would never admit it, that he kept a miniature portrait of his mother in his desk drawer and looked at it when he thought no one was watching. She learned that he loved her with a fierceness that sometimes took her breath away, that he would move heaven and earth for her, had already moved heaven and earth for her, and would do it again without hesitation, that he saw her, truly saw her, all of her, the broken parts and the healing parts and the parts she was still discovering, and loved her anyway. And she learned, slowly but surely, to love him back. The first time she said it out loud, "I love you, Phineas," she was lying in his arms after making love, drowsy and content, and the words slipped out before she could stop them. He went very still beneath her. "Say it again." "I love you." Again. "Phineas." She propped herself up to look at him and found his eyes bright with emotion. "I love you. I love you. I love you. How many times do you need to hear it?" "Every day for the rest of our lives," he said, and kissed her until she forgot how to breathe. Spring arrived with a riot of flowers and birdsong, and Gemma realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for several weeks, the nausea in the mornings, the tenderness in her breasts, the bone-deep exhaustion that came out of nowhere, but she hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. The physician confirmed it on a bright April morning, and Gemma walked back to the drawing room where Phineas was waiting, with her heart pounding and her hands trembling. "Well?" he asked, rising from his chair the moment she entered. "What did he say?" "He said," her voice caught, "he said we're going to have a baby." Phineas stared at her for one long, frozen moment. Then his face transformed with an expression of such pure, radiant joy that Gemma felt tears prick at her eyes. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Yes." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart racing against her chest. "I didn't dare hope," he murmured against her hair. "I told myself it didn't matter, that you were enough, that I didn't need. But I wanted this, Gemma. I wanted this so much." "So did I." She pulled back to look at him, smiling through her tears. "I didn't know I wanted it until I had it. I didn't know I could want anything anymore. But I want this. I want everything with you." He kissed her, soft and reverent, and when he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I love you," he said. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," she replied, "and I'm going to keep saying it every day for the rest of our lives." Their daughter was born in December, on a night when snow was falling soft and silent outside the windows of Ironmere House. The labor was long and difficult, 18 hours of pain that left Gemma exhausted and trembling. But Phineas stayed with her through every moment of it, holding her hand and murmuring encouragements, and absolutely refusing to leave her side despite the midwife's protests that birthing rooms were no place for men. "I watched her suffer for 18 months without being able to help," he told the midwife flatly. "I will not leave her now." And when it was finally over, when their daughter emerged into the world red-faced and screaming with fury at the indignity of being born, Phineas wept. He actually wept. This man who had faced death 100 times, who had killed enemies with his bare hands, who had built an empire of secrets and shadows. He stood at Gemma's bedside with their daughter cradled in his arms and tears streaming down his face, and he looked at her like she had given him the world. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Gemma, she's absolutely perfect." "She is." Gemma was exhausted, her body aching, her mind fuzzy with relief and joy. But she had never been happier. "What should we name her?" Phineas looked down at their daughter's tiny face, at the wisps of dark hair and the perfect rosebud mouth, and smiled. "Hope," he said. "I want to name her Hope, because that's what you gave me, Gemma. That's what you've always been to me. Hope that the world could be better than it was. Hope that love was real. Hope that broken things could be mended." Gemma felt. Tears spilled down her own cheeks. "Hope," she repeated. "It's perfect." And it was. Years passed, as years do, and the girl who had slept in the attic became a woman of consequence. Gemma grew into her role as Duchess, with a grace that surprised everyone, including herself. She established a home for women fleeing abusive households, funded from her own recovered inheritance. She hired solicitors to provide free legal advice to women who had no one else to advocate for them. She advocated, quietly but persistently, for reforms that would give women more protection under the law. And she had more children, 2 more daughters after Hope, and finally, a son who looked so much like his father that it made her heart ache with love every time she looked at him. They were happy, genuinely, deeply, impossibly happy. The kind of happy that Gemma had never dared to dream of, the kind of happy that she still sometimes couldn't quite believe was real. One evening, when Hope was 16 and already showing signs of the formidable woman she would become, she found her mother in the library, a familiar leather-bound book open on her lap. "What is that?" Hope asked, settling into the chair across from Gemma. "My ledger." Gemma traced the faded writing with gentle fingers. "From before. From the years I spent in my stepmother's house." Hope had heard the stories, of course, had grown up knowing what her mother had survived, how her father had saved her, what had been done to the people who had tried to destroy her. But she had never seen the evidence, the meticulous documentation of 4 years of suffering. "Why do you keep it?" Gemma was quiet for a long moment. "To remember," she said finally. "Not the pain. I have worked very hard to heal from the pain. But to remember that I survived. That even when everything seemed hopeless, even when I was certain I would die in that attic room, some part of me kept fighting, kept writing, kept believing that the truth mattered, even if no one would ever read it." She looked up at her daughter, at this bright, beloved girl who would never know the depths of despair her mother had experienced. "You will face hard things in your life, Hope. Everyone does. But I want you to remember something. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how alone you feel, keep writing. Keep documenting. Keep believing that the truth matters. Because someday, someone might find what you have written, and it might change everything. Hope took her mother's hand, squeezing gently. Is that what happened to you? Father found what you wrote. In a manner of speaking. Gemma smiled, remembering the poem Mrs. Blackwood had rescued from the ash bin, the poem that had found its way to Phineas's desk. He found me. That was what mattered. The door to the library opened, and Phineas appeared, gray-haired now but still vigorous, still looking at Gemma with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding night. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Never." Gemma held out her hand to him, and he crossed the room to take it, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We were just discussing the importance of documentation." "Ah." His eyes fell on the ledger, and something soft passed across his face. "I remember that ledger. I read it, you know, after we were married. Mrs. Blackwood gave me a copy she had made." "You never told me that." "Some things are private." He sat on the arm of her chair, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "But I will tell you now what I thought when I read it. I thought that I had married the bravest woman in England. I thought that anyone who could survive what you survived and still have the presence of mind to document it was worth any price to save." Hope was watching them with the particular embarrassment of a teenager witnessing parental affection. But beneath the embarrassment, Gemma could see something else, understanding, perhaps, of what her parents had built together. "I'm going to go find the others," Hope announced, rising from her chair, "before you two become insufferable." She swept out, the door closing behind her, and Gemma laughed. "We've scandalized our daughter again." "Good." Phineas leaned down to kiss her, gentle and familiar and full of promise. "I intend to keep scandalizing her until she's an old woman herself, and then I'll scandalize her children and her children's children. It's a family tradition." Gemma pulled him closer, the ledger forgotten on her lap, and thought about how far she had come from the girl in the attic room. That girl had given up hope. That girl had been certain she would never feel joy again. That girl had been so wrong. "I love you," she said against his lips. "Have I told you that today?" 3 times. He smiled, that same fierce, beautiful smile that had captured her heart at a ball a lifetime ago. "But I never tire of hearing it." "Then I'll tell you again." She cupped his face in her hands, this man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her everything she had thought was lost forever. "I love you, Phineas Blackwell, Duke of Ironmere. I love you, and I am the luckiest woman in England." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Gemma let herself sink into the feeling of safety and warmth and love. Outside the library windows, the sun was setting over the Ironmere Gardens, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the house, their children were laughing, and the cook was preparing dinner, and the life they had built together was continuing its steady, beautiful rhythm. She had survived. She had been saved. She had been loved. And she had lived in the end, happily ever after. Before you step away from this story, I want to share something with you about the real history that inspired it. In 1842, England, women like Gemma Harcourt had almost no legal protection from family members who wished to exploit them. Under the doctrine of coverture, which would not begin to change until the Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882, a woman's property, earnings, and even her physical person belonged to her husband, or to whatever male relative controlled her affairs. Stepmothers who abused their stepdaughters, fathers who stole their daughters' inheritances, husbands who beat their wives, All of these existed in a legal gray zone where the law was often complicit in their crimes. The courts were reluctant to intervene in family matters unless there was evidence of the most extreme abuse, and sometimes not even then. A woman who complained about mistreatment risked being labeled hysterical, ungrateful, or mad. Many were confined to asylums simply for defying the men who controlled their lives. The law did not recognize women as full persons deserving of protection. It recognized them as property to be managed. The women who survived these situations, and many didn't survive, often did so through precisely the kind of documentation Gemma kept in her ledger. They wrote letters. They kept diaries. They created records of their suffering in the hope that someday someone would believe them. Sometimes someone did. This story is for everyone who has ever felt invisible, for everyone who has been told they are nothing, who has been stripped of dignity and hope, who has wondered if anyone would ever see them for who they truly are. You are not invisible. You are not nothing. You are worth saving. And somewhere, whether you know it or not, someone is watching. Someone is waiting for the right moment to help. Someone is preparing to fight for you with everything they have. Hold on. Keep writing. Keep believing. Your Duke may be closer than you think. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched you, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what moment hit you the hardest. Was it the waltz? The wedding? The 5 days apart when they both suffered? The moment Gemma finally said no to her stepmother's plea for forgiveness? I read every single comment, and I love knowing that this community stretches across the world, all of us hungry for stories where love doesn't just happen, but conquers. Until next time, stay powerful, stay patient, and remember, the coldest hearts burn the hottest, but the strongest hearts burn the longest. This has been the Duke's Revenge. Sweet dreams.